Hey guys, Matt Bell here with the Electric Violin Shop. I'm in my home studio today, but we're going to be talking about a question that we get a lot from new electric violinists, and that is whether they should use separate stomp boxes or a multi-effects pedal to get their sound. Well, there's not an easy answer to this because every person is different and every rig and every situation is different. So I want to sort of teach you about the pros and cons of each one of those two systems, and then maybe you can decide which one is best for you. So there's basically three ways that we can have effects with electric strings. We can have them built into the amp, we can have pedals on a board, or we can have multi-effects. Okay, so you need to know whether you want a lot of effects in your sound or not a lot of effects in your sound. And you're like, I have no idea what that means. I'll tell you. So this is a list of common effects over here on the right-hand side. You want to sort of decide, do I want to have a heavily processed sound, or do I want a very lightly processed sound? Okay, so basically, do I want a lot or do I want a little? And if you don't know what any of these things are that you're looking at, we have a bunch of videos to describe these things on our YouTube channel, and we'll put a link or two up here so where you can see. Maybe there's an effects video with Christian Howes that talks about what all these different effects are, and there's some stuff talking about volume pedals and wah pedals. So all this stuff is on our YouTube page. If you do a little exploring, you might learn, okay, what are these different sounds? So we're back to the amp, a pedal, or some pedals on a pedal board, or multi-effects. Most amps have reverb built into them. So if the only effect you really want is maybe some EQ and some reverb, most amps have that already built in. So if you say, listen, I want a fairly simple sound, I think just some EQ and some reverb, you're probably just going to need an amplifier. Now there are a few amps that have more effects built into them. There's a picture of two of them here. Right above me here is the Boss Katana. They have a 50 and a 100 watt amp. They also have a little sort of a desktop amp that has a bunch of effects built into it. And then over here you can see the Yamaha THR series has a ton of effects built into it too. It's a great little practice amp. It's not going to be loud enough for performance setting probably, but both of these amps have a bunch of effects built into them. So there are some options if you want to stay fairly simple on the hardware side, but do want to explore some effects. What most people do though is they will go with either a pedal board with a bunch of loose separate pedals on it, or a multi-effects unit. So let's talk about what do these look like. So right above me here, you can see that's a pedal board with a bunch of pedals on it, and they're all hardwired. So you'll Velcro these things on, and then you'll run a little patch cable from pedal to pedal, and then you have to power each one of them. So we've got to think about those things. And then over here, you're going to see the Boss ME80, which is probably the most popular multi-effects pedal that we sell. It's got a bunch of, you can see all those knobs and stuff, and it looks really intimidating. Well, there's a bunch of knobs up here too. So it's not that intimidating. It's actually laid out really well, and it makes perfect sense how the ME80 works. And you can store your different patches and stuff in there. It's a really useful pedal. Now, so there are pros and cons to using pedals on a pedal board. Let's look at the pros. You only buy what you need. So if you don't want a flanger, well, you're not going to pay for a flanger. You can get very specific sounds. If you like this very particular wah sound, then you can buy a wah pedal that has that exact sound. So it's easy to tweak on the fly if you've got your pedal board out with all these knobs and levers and buttons and stuff on there. In the middle of a show, if you want a little more delay on something, you just reach down and turn the knob. You can make a pedal board to be really big or really small. You can very much customize the size of this. And it's modular, so it's failure resistant. If I have one pedal that goes down, well, I just bypass that pedal, and then I can get my show done. Maybe I don't have the delay that I want, but at least I can still play and I can still get sound. With the cons, separate pedals can get very expensive. You know, you're buying a bunch of these things. Every time you want a new sound, you've got to buy a new pedal. You have to power all these pedals. If you have a big pedal board like the one we just saw, You can't just run a daisy chain. You're going to have to buy an isolated power supply so that you don't have a big hum or buzz or a mess with that. Gain structure is key. You have to be really careful to make sure that one pedal doesn't send out too strong a signal to overdrive all the pedals after it. Or if it's too weak, you can starve the pedals after it and they're not going to sound right. Another con is you have a hardwired signal path. In some of the more expensive multi-effects pedals, you can actually have a different signal path for every patch. If you have a hardwired pedal board, the signal goes in and it goes from this pedal to this pedal to this pedal to this pedal. You're not going to rewire that in the middle of a show. So you're always going to have this pedal feeding that pedal. I can't have a sound where it's opposite of that. Another potential con is there's a lot of connections. The more physical connections you have, the more independent points of failure you have. You can have one little cable go bad and it might take you an hour to find that. So it is a little more complex from a physical standpoint. With a multi-effects, one of the pros is experimentation is free. If you're like, man, I really don't know if I would like a tremolo sound, well, I've got a tremolo already built into my multi-effects, so I'm just going to experiment with that. If you are using separate pedals and you want to experiment with a tremolo sound, you either got to go buy a tremolo pedal or borrow one or whatever. You don't have gain structure issues. You don't have to worry about inside your multi-effects unit. You don't have to worry about one effect overdriving the other. You don't have power supply issues. You have one power supply that supplies the whole thing. With the more expensive pedal, the multi-effects, you can actually have multiple different signal paths. You could have a delay feeding a reverb in one sound and then a reverb feeding a delay in another sound. There's no patch cables to go bad. The cons can also be very expensive. The Helix that I play through is almost $1,700. You can't split it up for travel. It is a solid unit and you can't make it any smaller than it is. You usually end up buying a smaller unit to take with you if you need a fly rig. You are also stuck with the effects that it has. If it only doesn't have a delay sound that you like, well, you're either going to have to go buy another delay pedal or whatever. You're stuck with just the effects that it has. They can be a little harder to tweak on stage. The ME80 is sort of an exception to that. The ME80 is very easy to tweak on stage. Some of the other multi-effects units, really you got to do that at home. You have to do your programming at home. And another con is that you've put all your eggs in one basket. You've got one unit that you're playing through, and if it goes down in the middle of a show, you're standing there looking at an audience without being able to make any sound. Let's look at prices. Multi-effects pedals can start around $100 and can go up into the $2,000 range. Separate pedals can be as cheap as I've seen some for $20 or $30. And it's not hard to spend $1,000 on a single pedal if you've got a very specific pedal that you want. You want to keep in mind that apart from the multi-effects and the pedals, your preamp, your looper, your wireless, your flight case, cables, power supplies, all these are separate and additional. Most pedals, or a lot of pedals, I will say, don't even come with a power supply. So you may have to buy a separate power supply. So basically we come down to which one is best. The answer is, I can't help you with that. I can't tell you whether your situation is going to be better to go with loose pedals or a multi-effects pedal. Each situation is different. You're going to have to kind of go through those pros and cons and decide which is best for you. I actually use both. I use a hybrid board that has a multi-effects, a Helix on it, and then I've got a pitch shifter and an organ machine and a wireless and a tuner. So I have 4 separate pedals plus my multi-effects. That's actually a pretty common thing with touring pros. So you might end up with both. And you're probably going to have multiple iterations of this throughout your career. You're probably going to have a bunch of different rigs. As you're on this quest for tone that we're all kind of on here, multi-effects, loose pedals, you're probably going to have a collection of both. But when you're first getting started, it may be easiest for you to decide, gosh, that one sort of seems like the best way for me to go. And I just want to provide you information so you can make an informed decision for yourself. If you still feel like you don't know what to do, feel free to call Electric Violin Shop. You can talk to Chris or Susie or Jamie or me, whoever's there. We can all, we're happy to answer the questions that you may have and maybe help you figure out what is best for your individual situation. All right, thanks so much.